Today on Little Wars TV, we tackle the most fascinating strategic what-if moment of the American Civil War. What if Robert E. Lee, instead of invading Pennsylvania, had listened to the Confederate War Cabinet and attempted to save Vicksburg from Ulysses S. Grant? We are on location in Vicksburg, Mississippi, to find out what could have happened.
And how are we going to test that, Greg?
A war game, of course. We've brought along an operational war game covering the theater between Vicksburg and the state capital of Jackson, where this decisive campaign was waged.
But in our war game, 2 divisions from Lee's Army of Northern Virginia are en route by train, racing south to save the city.
And it's not some fanciful what-if speculation. This plan was hotly debated in Richmond in the spring of 1863.
We'll explore the details of that very real debate. What if Jefferson Davis and James Longstreet had been able to convince Lee to relieve Vicksburg? Would 2 veteran divisions under Hood and Pickett been enough to tip the scales, Greg?
I don't know, but we're about to find out right now on Little Wars TV.
In the spring of 1863, the American Civil War is now in its 3rd bloody year, and the outcome remains in doubt. In the West, federal armies have gobbled up huge swaths of rebel territory, including the largest city in the Confederacy, New Orleans.
But in the East, Richmond remains in rebel hands, and Robert E. Lee has inflicted a string of embarrassing defeats against a revolving door of Union generals. Across the country, even around the world, Lee is a household name. But Lee is a long way from where we are standing right now, Tom. We are in Vicksburg, the Confederacy's last link over the Mississippi River.
That's right, and by 1863, Vicksburg is a fortress city. It's said to be the most heavily defended city in North America. And with good reason. It's the only secure link the Confederacy has between its eastern and western halves. With most of her ports blockaded, critical supplies ranging from food to smuggled weapons are carried from Texas, by rail, through Vicksburg.
The city is perched atop a steep bluff overlooking the river. The modern bridges that you see today did not exist in 1863. Men and materiel were shuttled across by a fleet of steamboats and ferries. But this entire stretch of river is commanded by formidable Confederate gun batteries. On our landward side, the city is ringed with trenches and forts, further guarded by swamps, rivers, and tangled woods. As a defensive position, Vicksburg is, well, perfect.
That's right. The man tasked with capturing Vicksburg is Ulysses S. Grant, famously known for taking Forts Henry and Donelson. But Grant has found Vicksburg a far harder nut to crack. Since late 1862, he's tried striking the city from multiple directions, with each attempt ending in spectacular failure. There are whispers in the spring of 1863 that perhaps Grant is not the man for the job.
Tom, Grant hears those rumors, and he decides to stake everything, his career and his reputation, on a dangerous crossing of the Mississippi River. This move puts 40,000 federal troops between Vicksburg and Jackson, the state capital. Alarm bells are ringing across the Confederacy. How can Grant be stopped this time?
Actually, those alarm bells started ringing long before Grant's May crossing. On March 11th, 2 months before Grant's strike across the Mississippi, Robert E. Lee attended a council of war in Richmond at the Confederate White House. The main question at hand, how could they relieve pressure in the Western theater?
The Confederacy faces major threats across multiple fronts, and in every one of them, they are outnumbered. This is an ugly strategic picture, but the rebels do have one possible advantage to leverage. Let's allow General James Longstreet to share his insight.
Passing through Richmond, I called to report to Secretary of War Seddon, who referred to affairs in Mississippi, stating that the department was trying to collect an army at Jackson under General Joseph E. Johnston, sufficient to push Grant away from his circling lines about Vicksburg. He spoke of the difficulty of feeding as well as collecting an army of that magnitude in Mississippi, and asked my views. I suggested that the only prospect of relieving Vicksburg that occurred to me was to send General Johnston and his troops to reinforce General Bragg's army. At the same time, the 2 divisions of my command then marching to join General Lee. That the commands moving on converging lines could have rapid transit, that Grant's was the only army that could be drawn to meet this move, and that the move must, therefore, relieve Vicksburg. It was manifest before the war was accepted that the only way to equalize the contest was by skillful use of our interior lines, and this was so impressed by 2 years' experience that it seemed time to force it upon the Richmond authorities. General James Longstreet.
Longstreet's position is shared by Beauregard, the Secretary of War, and many others.
One man remains to be convinced: Lee. March passes to April, and April to May. The threat to Vicksburg looms larger.
The Secretary of War requests that Lee send George Pickett's division to join a small force assembling under Joseph E. Johnston in Mississippi.
Again, Lee will have none of it. He writes to the Secretary of War: "The adoption of your proposition is hazardous, and it becomes a question between Virginia and the Mississippi." Lee believes the war will be decided in the East, not the West. And at the peak of his fame and powers, he believes he's the man to do it.
History, Tom, will not look back kindly on Lee's decision.
No, but it shouldn't have been Lee's decision to make. President Davis could have overruled Lee. Literally, the entire civilian cabinet and most of the South's leading generals disagreed with Lee's strategic analysis. One of Lee's chief aides and vocal admirer, Edward Porter Alexander, criticized his boss in his memoirs.
It was a fatal mistake that in this choice we failed to utilize the single advantage in the game of war which the Confederacy enjoyed. We occupied the interior lines and could reinforce from one flank to the other across the country. Here in May 1863 was presented a rare opportunity to inaugurate what might be called an army on wheels within the Confederate lines. Edward Porter Alexander.
In our war game today, we are going to test Porter's hypothesis. What if Lee had allowed Longstreet to take Pickett and Hood west?
Well, there is one issue that Porter glosses over, and that's the poor state of Confederate railroads. It's a slow, indirect network plagued with delays. But we do know how long it took Longstreet to move west by rail in September of 1863. A safe estimation for transport to Jackson, Mississippi would be 2 weeks.
One problem, Tom. On May 14th, 1863, Sherman's corps burns Jackson to the ground, wrecking the city.
We're going to start our operational war game in early May, before Jackson's destruction.
And we're going to make 2 other assumptions for the sake of our game. We're going to assume that the decision to send relief to Vicksburg was made wholeheartedly by mid-April at the latest.
Our game also speculates that Longstreet's divisions are being sent directly to Mississippi and not to Bragg in Middle Tennessee, as was originally discussed.
That means that our Confederate players will be able to count on the arrival of at least 1, maybe 2 full divisions in or around Jackson. We'll randomize their exact arrival time just to keep our players in suspense.
We've brought along this custom tabletop on our trip to Vicksburg to play an operational war game spanning the critical month of May 1863. In this game, 1 base of figures represent an entire division, and 1 grid space on our theater map is about 2.5 miles.
That makes this more of a board game in scope, but we really do need to zoom out to this level to cover Grant's entire operation.
Well, I'm Keith, and I'm proud to be playing Grant. I actually named my youngest son, his middle name is Grant, named after Ulysses S. Grant, because he did more than most people to end the institution of slavery. So, that being said, now being Grant, I'm not really sure how I'm going to approach this yet, because my forces are fairly limited and I have to go after 2 fairly distant from each other objectives, and holding Vicksburg alone, or besieging it alone, is not going to be really enough. If I do besiege it and put some forces around it, I can collect victory points every turn, but that alone won't be enough to really win this. And the way the Big Black River comes through really kind of divides up the terrain in a way that I'm still not sure exactly how I'm going to move my troops around. So I think what I'm going to try to do is move McClernand north to try to capture, or at least threaten, Vicksburg, and then move the rest of my corps and sort of shield Vicksburg from them trying to come at it to reinforce. And I'm just hoping the way things shake out, depending on what they do, that I'll be able to eventually approach Jackson itself and threaten it, or eliminate some of their, units and level the playing field. I'm not sure how that's going to play out. We'll see.
I'm Mark, and I'm playing Pemberton.
I'm Miles, and I'll be Johnson. I'd like to try to keep Keith off kilter and take a central position. Leave the two divisions in Vicksburg. Move everything else that you have to a central location, and then we can either move to reinforce Jackson or see what he does. But I think Keith will have the initiative. I think we want to meet him out in battle and see what these reinforcements are. Hopefully Lee has listened to wise counsel and is sending us reinforcements.
I agree. I think we go out, we mix it up, we keep him off his back feet, right? And if we just sit, then he has the initiative.
Yeah,
we have to grab the initiative.
I'm just worried Lee is not going to listen to reason, and he is overrated.
I heard you at Vicksburg Battlefield today.
Yeah.
You said
So
Lee
we don't
sucks.
know if we can really
You
debate.
said Lee sucks.
Yeah.
I heard that.
We're going to hear about that one.
We have an extensive Vicksburg battlefield tour coming up later this month where you can join us for a driving tour of the national park. Stay tuned for that tour later this month. 7 guys from our club visited Vicksburg in May, and after a full 8-hour day on the battlefield, we retired back to our bed and breakfast, the Inn at Cedar Grove, to play our war game on the outdoor veranda. If you ever find yourself in Vicksburg, this historic home was here at the time of the battle. They even have 2 cannonballs still lodged in the parlor floor and the wall, and we absolutely love staying here.
Lest anyone think we're turning into travel influencers, this bed and breakfast is not a sponsor of today's video. We paid full price for our stay, and the owners are lovely folks, and they've done a great job restoring this Civil War era home.
Absolutely. 5 stars from Little Wars TV.
Speaking of the trip, Tom, we designed this operational game in the months leading up to our journey specifically to fit inside an airplane carry-on bag. This backpack contains everything: the board, the miniatures, cards, dice, and the rules.
Inside, we packed 4 panels that combine to form the theater map. We also have 2 little boxes that not only serve a role in the game, but also double as miniature storage for the flight. And now we're ready to play. It's a true travel war game experience.
Let's take a look at our opening setup. Divisions are on the map within their historical deployment areas for early May 1863. 1 turn in our operational wargame represents anywhere from 1 to 3 days of real time. This is a game I'm somewhat embarrassed to admit I've been developing on and off for about 3 years. It is loosely based on Altar of Freedom, which features a bidding mechanic for opposing armies to maneuver their divisions. Well, in this new game, we're jumping up a level. Here's a look at Keith's player sheet as Grant. As you can see on the top portion of the sheet, he is bidding staff points for various army-level functions. He can order all the divisions of a corps to march, or he could attempt other tasks, ranging from engineering to reconnaissance.
On the bottom half of Keith's player sheet, you can see the strength of his divisions. Here's Sherman's Corps. Each box represents about 1,000 men, and as units suffer losses in battle, you cross off the boxes. We'll talk more about how combat works when our first battle happens, but suffice it to say, this is a war game where many battles are likely to occur over the course of a 2-hour session.
During the next 2 hours, we're going to play up to 14 turns, representing May through early June 1863. Now let's get started with turn 1. Okay, so we shuffle up our event deck. First card of the game is Reinforcements. George Pickett's division joins Johnston's relief army. This is one of our what-if cards.
Yeah, that's horseshit.
Pickett's division can be placed at Jackson, Calhoun, or Midway, which are the 3 top spots on the rail line. And that is our very first random event card of the game. Then we go to see Initiative. Did anybody bid to add points to the turn clock? For Chief of Staff. Any Chief of Staff bids?
Yeah.
No.
What'd you bid, Keith?
1.
1. You get to add 1. So each side rolls a d6. High roll wins.
Keith wins the initiative and opens our evening campaign by pushing McPherson's corps closer to the Big Black River, seeking an unopposed crossing. He's pursuing a different strategy than Grant did historically. Keith wants to take up a central position between Vicksburg and Jackson, rather than going directly for the state capital.
Of course, our game this evening is already quite ahistorical because we've introduced the possibility of Longstreet's troops appearing in Mississippi. And our first random event card at the start of the turn already has George Pickett's division disembarking in Jackson. There are 10 random event cards in our deck for this scenario, ranging from reinforcements to bad weather to historical snafus like McClernand's feud with Grant. At the start of each turn, we draw one card. John Bell Hood's arrival is one of the cards that's still lurking somewhere in the random event deck. We don't know if or when he will appear.
One of the neat mechanics in this game is that the players can insert their own cards into the random event deck by performing an army action called signals. Each side has a few options available. Turn 1, while Keith is marching his troops closer to the Big Black River, Miles and Mark conduct a signals action, calling on French's division of reinforcements to assemble in Jackson. This card is now shuffled into the random event deck. We don't know when it will be drawn.
The next two turns are both very heavy on maneuver, as both armies seek to position their forces for the first inevitable battlefield encounter. But before the fighting begins in earnest, we should explain the victory conditions and how each side wins the campaign.
As the Union player, Keith tracks victory points, and he does so in secret without revealing his progress to the Confederates. He scores a variable number of points for winning minor battles and major battles. He can also score 2 points for the capture of Edwards Station or Bolton Depot, representing Grant's goal of cutting rebel communications between Vicksburg and Jackson.
Speaking of Jackson, that is a big victory point prize for the Union. On the other side of the map, Vicksburg itself cannot be assaulted as long as the rebels garrison it. The defenses are just assumed to be too strong. But Keith can earn 2 victory points each turn that he occupies the spaces surrounding the city. A few turns of laying siege to Vicksburg could really rack up a lot of victory points for the Union.
There's one way Keith can lose victory points in the game, and that's if he suffers defeat in a major battle. Major battles are defined as battles with at least 3 divisions engaged per side. Remember, the maneuver elements on our map each represent a full division.
Here is the victory point track that Keith will secretly update throughout the game. He needs to reach the middle row to qualify for a minor victory and the bottom blue row for a major strategic victory. As we return to the action on what is now our 4th turn, Keith has yet to score any points.
He doesn't appear to be in a hurry either. Keith's strategy in the early turns of our game is to concentrate his forces in a central position and see what opportunities might appear. The marching is hampered by some poor weather and rain, but Keith is also busying himself with some cavalry raids.
One of the operations that armies can undertake is called recon, and this allows an army to move its cavalry pickets around the map and harass undefended enemy supply depots. And with their own forces spread rather thin, most of the Confederate depots are unprotected. Those are perfect targets for Keith's patrols.
Miles and Mark do not take the bait and attempt to chase down the Federal raids. They're content to continue the buildup of Johnston's relief army in Jackson, and here our random event cards are proving most useful. William Walker's division and John Bell Hood's division are both already assembling ahead of schedule. That means Longstreet and both of his divisions are on the table, and it's only turn 5.
Turn 5 is still just the middle of May 1863, so we have plenty of time remaining. Well, at least in the game we do. Here on the veranda of our bed and breakfast, the sun is setting over the Mississippi for a beautiful night. It's hard to imagine a better way to spend an evening, outdoors with mint juleps, cigars, and a good war game.
Our apologies for the lighting that continues to get darker throughout tonight's game, but that's what happens when you're gaming outdoors in the evening.
With 10 days now elapsed in our campaign, Grant has yet to fight a battle, and Longstreet's corps is gathering around Raymond, west of Jackson. In our game, it feels like the rebels are the ones who are moving with urgency.
Keith isn't blind to the growing relief army. In fact, he feels well positioned to counter it. McClernand's corps, which has been mostly inactive so far, finally marches up the Mississippi to threaten Vicksburg from the south. And in the center, Keith crosses the Big Black River to position himself behind the river and block any relief attempts from Vicksburg.
The Big Black River is a pretty significant obstacle in the region. In an upcoming video, we will take you to see one of the main crossing points from 1863. But for the purposes of our game tonight, what you need to know is that the river can only be crossed at these marked ferries and bridges.
Except 2 of them. These 2 have already been washed out by random event weather cards in the game. The crossings can be repaired with engineering, but Keith's position behind the Big Black River is a formidable one.
While Miles and Mark plot their strategy for how to cross the river, Keith finally sees an opportunity to engage in battle. 2 of Pemberton's divisions are deployed south of Vicksburg to keep a watchful eye on McClernand's glacially slow advance. But on turn 7, the rebels are about to receive a rude awakening.
Keith suddenly changes his bidding strategy, spending a lot of staff points to prioritize McClernand's corps and seize the initiative. Miles and Mark are caught by surprise when a quick march pins the rebels against the Mississippi, forcing them to give battle.
Per the rules of our game, once a battle is triggered, each side has the opportunity to potentially draw in support from up to 4 spaces away. Keith does have some nearby support, while Mark, playing as Pemberton, could draw support from the garrison at Vicksburg, but he chooses not to leave the city defenseless.
Battles are very quick to resolve in this system, with each side deploying their forces from the game board to a mini battle board. Battles can last multiple rounds, so you're never quite sure how long an engagement will go. For each round, the engaged troops roll 1 die per strength point in the division. Attackers hit on a 5 or better, and defenders hit on a 4 or better.
I believe it. Screw this.
What a complete joker.
What is up with these guys? I am not using those dice.
After some hideous Confederate die rolling, the rebels are routed and forced to fall back.
Not a good start for Pemberton.
No, but because only 2 Confederate divisions were engaged, it only counts as a minor battle for Keith. But the road to Vicksburg is now wide open.
Not if our rebel players have anything to say about it. Although he doesn't have his full strength assembled, Longstreet sees an opportunity to force a crossing of the Big Black River. He will lead Pickett and Gregg's division, some 12,000 troops, to secure a foothold. In a sharp 2-round engagement, Longstreet is thwarted by McPherson's corps. The river proves formidable, improving Keith's defense rolls from 4+ to 3+. Miles now ponders the scope of this dilemma. To reach Vicksburg, he'll either need to concentrate more troops at Bridgeport, or he could take a detour to swing around to the south and make use of a second ferry.
Miles does not want to waste any time. He hurries more Confederate divisions from Jackson toward the front, and in a very risky decision, orders Pemberton to try and hit Grant's army in the rear and draw off some Union troops.
And then, disaster strikes. Our next random event is flash floods, reducing all movement and destroying 1 random ferry on the Big Black River. Guess which crossing is knocked out?
This is truly the worst possible timing for the rebels, and Keith knows it. And he'll use this new opportunity to order McClernand's corps to hit an isolated rebel division south of Vicksburg, trapping them in a vicious 3-round battle. The odds are heavily stacked against Bowen's division, but this is an elite formation. Note the red shaded box in Bowen's strength. That's the sign of an elite brigade in the division, which allows Mark to re-roll misses.
But it won't be enough. Heavily outnumbered and with no way to retreat, Bowen's division is boxed in. They'll be forced to surrender, eliminating one of Pemberton's best units from the campaign.
To the east, there is still hope. Miles has bid a huge number of staff points to ensure that he can complete an engineering operation to repair the damaged crossing over the Big Black River, opening the door for a reinforced Longstreet to attempt another attack next turn.
And that's precisely how turn 9 begins, with a major rebel assault over the river. Miles puts everything he has into this all-or-nothing gamble. He's spent staff points to coordinate a bombardment, and he commits Longstreet's general card into the action, allowing him to use a special battle ability.
Now that is a big risk, because playing a general's card requires you to shuffle it back into the random event deck. That means Longstreet's powerful card will be unavailable for an uncertain amount of time, until it's drawn again in a later turn.
But for now, the gamble pays off. The Confederates win a major victory at the Second Battle of Bridgeport, with McPherson's corps driven back to the west. But with the relief army inching closer, Vicksburg is finally placed under siege by McClernand's corps. This is important because, remember, Keith will earn 2 victory points for every turn he can keep the city surrounded.
Miles would love nothing more than to hurry even more reinforcements to the front, but his ability to do so is increasingly limited. You may recall very early in the campaign when Keith spent a few turns raiding rebel supply depots with his scouts. Well, all that destruction and harassment is finally having an effect, removing critical staff points from Johnston's pool. Supply in this game is handled somewhat abstractly, but the loss of each depot costs your army 1 staff point.
Over in the Federal Army, the supply situation is actually improving. Our next random event card is a signal operation Keith inserted into the deck several turns ago. It gives him more staff points to spend and restores some critical manpower losses.
Tommy's going to need every soldier he can get, because Longstreet is determined to force the issue outside Vicksburg. He's attacking once again, driving hard to reach the city. Hood and Pickett's divisions lead the way. Large veteran divisions with combat bonuses. The battle is ferocious but short.
Grant is driven back again. If he could find a way to mass all 3 of his corps together, he could probably smash Longstreet's vanguard.
But doing so would mean lifting the siege of Vicksburg.
Keith decides he has no choice. He'll lift the siege in order to take the offensive and move the full weight of Grant's army against Longstreet. With 1 hammer blow, he can deliver a crushing, decisive blow.
Just one problem, Tom. Our next random event card is a historically based feud between Grant and McClernand. In game terms, it means that McClernand will not obey any order to move this turn. Keith's grand plans for an offensive are now in tatters.
The timing is awful because Johnston isn't about to let up. Our rebel players capitalize on McClernand's inaction to roll the dice on another attack. They hit from multiple angles, rolling up Grant's position from north to south.
That kind of tactical maneuver is possible due to the way the mini battle board works. When you fight a battle in the game, each of these 4 grid spaces will be resolved 1 at a time. And there are bonuses from attacking your opponent from multiple angles, too. It's a hard-fought battle, with Grant's 2 corps narrowly defeated. He'll retreat from the battlefield beaten, but still in good order.
Keith is hoping that next turn he'll be able to call upon McClernand for a redo. But as it happens, there won't be a next turn. We've reached the end of the campaign.
While the Union player in this scenario secretly tracks victory points, it's the Confederate players who track the passage of time. This is the calendar, which advances 1 or 2 spaces at the end of every turn. Miles and Mark have been rolling for this the entire game without telling Keith how much time is left.
It is now early June 1863, and as we check the victory point track, Grant has not achieved enough. Vicksburg is under siege, but the rebel relief army is across the Big Black River and has won multiple battles, pressing Grant backward, and Jackson has not been threatened.
I think in our version of history, there might be some pressure from Washington to consider replacing Grant after this performance. He's in a much more tenuous position than he was historically. And seeing how our game played out, I think there's no question it's due to Longstreet and his 2 divisions.
That veteran force of 13,000 men is the kind of punch Joseph E. Johnston simply did not have in 1863. If he had, I think you saw in our game how dangerous that could have been to Grant's chances. Longstreet absolutely did make the difference today.
Well, guys, it's the morning after a very lovely game on the veranda.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say, that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
It was a very pleasant experience.
It was a very pleasant experience. I mean, there were trains going in the background.
See the river.
The river.
It's a lovely place. I highly recommend you come to Vicksburg. But I think we're not doing a travel log. I think we're actually talking about our reflections on the game.
Yes, of course. Our great victory in the South.
You're barely victory. I did not get anywhere near Jackson. Now, I don't know who it benefited or hurt more, really, but when the Big Black River flooded, and knocked out that one crossing from Jackson to Vicksburg, I wanted to go to Jackson, and it helped protect you, and actually I think it set you up for a good assault.
Well, it cost us a turn because I probably overspent on engineering points, but we had to get that bridge fixed.
Right.
But I mean, I don't think you can overspend on that because that was like the crux.
Yeah, but we lost a full turn.
But if you had not made it over the river,
we're done.
I was toast.
Yeah.
If you want to hear more from Keith, Mark, and Miles, head over to the Free Stuff section of Little Wars TV and join the guys for a longer, more in-depth discussion of what they would have done differently and which missed opportunities hurt each side the most in the war game.
Best of all, the free stuff section is, well, totally free to access on the Little Wars TV website.
Yeah,
It was a great game.
It was.
It was a great game.
And I'm not normally an operational level guy, but that I found myself not wanting to get into battles. I was like, I'm
And
good.
Lake Break set the game up.
Yeah.
It was very simple. You could see everything. It was a very enjoyable evening.
And
We're very fortunate to be here.
We just spent the day before driving those roads.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's just, there's nothing better than being at the place, going through the terrain, and then playing a game.
Yeah.
It's just great.
I loved it. I walked up to the map and I knew where everything was, and
Yeah.
already had formulated an idea in my mind of what I was going to do. That was fun.
I'd play that game again in a heartbeat.
Yeah, especially on the veranda here in Vicksburg.
Yeah. with a
Overlooking
drink,
the river.
Yeah, with a drink in hand
With a mint julep.
in a nice summer.
Right. Oh, I didn't get a mint julep.
Yeah, oh, and the juleps are very good.
Yeah.
Well, okay, I think we should stay another night then.
Yeah, I'm cool with that.
In case you couldn't tell from today's video, we thoroughly enjoyed our time in Vicksburg. For any American Civil War history buff, this is a must-see town on your battlefield bucket list. But if you live halfway around the world and don't think you'll make it here, don't worry. Just check back in a couple weeks for our Vicksburg Battlefield Tour, and you can drive along with us.
One more public service announcement we should make, Tom. July 20th to 23rd is Historicon, the largest historical wargaming show in the United States. It happens every summer, and later this month we'll be at the show running dozens of amazing wargames, including one from the Vicksburg campaign, the Battle of Champion Hill.
And I'll be doing Brandy Station, the largest cavalry battle of the war. Dave is running our Chosen Reservoir game, which you saw on the channel recently. And Miles has built one of the coolest custom tables I've ever seen. It's a World War II event you won't want to miss.
Mark and his guys will be there running games too. We also have some Wild West action on tap. Overall, it's just going to be a great weekend of wargaming, so come to Historicon and join us.
As always, thank you for watching Little Wars TV. 60% of our viewers have not subscribed yet, so if that's you, what are you waiting for?
Click it. You know you want to.